In 2006, Sir Alex Ferguson stood up at Roy Keane's retirement tribute and said something that stopped the room. He had managed Cristiano Ronaldo, a man who would go on to become the greatest goal scorer in the history of football. He had managed Eric Cantona, the player United supporters still call their king. He had managed Paul Scholes, who Zinedine Zidane once described as the best midfielder of his generation. He had managed Ryan Giggs, Wayne Rooney, Peter Schmeichel. 13 Premier League titles, 2 Champions League trophies, the most successful manager in English football history. And when he had to choose, when he was asked to name the best player he had worked with across all of those years, Ferguson did not name any of them. He said Roy's obsession with winning and the demands he put on others made him the most influential player in the dressing room. He became a great captain through that, and to my mind, he is the best player I have had in all of my time here. The best player I have had in all of my time here. Now here is the part that makes that sentence strange. Because Ferguson had also said something else about Keane, something that sounds on the surface like it directly contradicts the verdict. He said Keane was not as talented as the others. Not as talented, but the best of all of them. That contradiction is not a mistake. That contradiction is the entire point of this video and the secret behind every title Manchester United won. To understand what Ferguson actually meant and why it matters far beyond a tribute speech, you need to understand what Roy Keane was before he was the captain of Manchester United. He was born on August 10, 1971, in Cork, Ireland. His father Mossy worked in a factory. His mother Marie raised the family. 4 brothers, 1 sister. A working-class family in the Mayfield neighborhood of Cork, one of the more deprived areas of a city that was itself far from the center of English football's attention. At 14, Keane wrote letters to English clubs asking for a trial. Few responded. Nottingham Forest were one of them. They turned him down, but said if he was any good they would spot him when he turned 18. So Keane went back to Cork. He signed for Cobh Ramblers, an amateur club in the League of Ireland, playing in front of a few hundred people in a part-time league that had no visible route to the English First Division. He trained. He improved. He played as though every match was the last one he'd get. In an FAI Youth Cup match in February 1990, a Nottingham Forest scout named Noel McCabe happened to be watching. He asked Keane to travel to England for a trial. Keane impressed Brian Clough. A deal worth £47,000 was struck. The English clubs that had ignored his letters 3 years earlier had just let a future captain of Manchester United sign for someone else for less than the price of a decent family car. And the story of what came next, of how a boy from an Irish amateur club became the player Ferguson chose above every world-class talent he ever managed, is the story of what football almost missed. By the summer of 1993, Roy Keane was the hottest young midfielder in English football. Nottingham Forest had been relegated. The contract escape clause Keane had negotiated was activated. And Blackburn Rovers, backed by steel magnate Jack Walker's millions, managed by Kenny Dalglish, in the middle of building what would become the 1994-95 Premier League champions, wanted him badly. Dalglish and Keane met. They agreed a deal. They shook hands on terms on a Friday. But the paperwork couldn't be completed and signed off over the weekend. That administrative delay, a Friday afternoon contract that couldn't be finalized before the weekend, is the moment that changed English football. Ferguson had gotten wind that Dalglish had upped the ante. He arranged for Keane to come to his home in Wilmslow, Cheshire. They played a couple of frames of snooker. No press conference. No formal presentation. 2 men in a house in Cheshire, playing snooker on a Saturday, while the paperwork at Blackburn sat and signed. By Monday, Keane had chosen United. He joined for a then-British record fee of £3.75 million. The player who would become Ferguson's greatest, his own word, almost never arrived. One weekend, one unsigned contract, one snooker table in Cheshire separated the version of history we know from the version where Roy Keane won the title with Blackburn Rovers and Manchester United never completed the treble. But before we get to what Keane built at United, there is something to understand about what he was and wasn't. Ferguson's praise for Keane was never without its honest counterweight. He had Scholes, who could pass with precision that most midfielders only dream about. He had Cantona, who could turn a match with a single touch that nobody else in the stadium saw coming. He had a young Cristiano Ronaldo who, within a few years of arriving at Old Trafford at 17, was producing skill and pace and finishing that his own generation could barely contain. Keane's game was built on something different. It was built on intensity, on the refusal to accept second best from a player next to him or from himself, on covering the ground nobody else could see needed covering. on the tackle at the moment when the entire game hung on one tackle being made. Teddy Sheringham played alongside Keane both at Nottingham Forest and at Manchester United. His description of what Keane brought is the most precise any teammate ever gave. He was a driving force on the pitch. I don't think you get those captains very often in your career. He certainly carried out the authority on the pitch that was told to him by the manager. He led by example and just carried us more often than not. Carried us. Not inspired, not encouraged. Carried. Ferguson understood something that the world of football, even now, struggles to articulate cleanly. The player who makes every other player perform above their level is worth more than the player who performs above every other player's level. Ronaldo, Cantona, Scholes, they were extraordinary individuals. But the team around Keane played better than it was capable of playing without him. And it is the team, not the individual, that wins trophies. But even those who understood Keane's value had never seen it tested the way it was tested on one night in Turin. April 21st, 1999. Stadio dell'Alpi, Turin, Italy. Manchester United vs. Juventus. Champions League semi-final, second leg. Juventus had appeared in the 3 previous Champions League finals. An Italian team had made it to the final 7 straight years. United had never reached the final since the competition became the Champions League. Against this Juventus side, Zidane in midfield, Inzaghi in attack, Deschamps and Davids alongside the Italian, one of the most complete squads assembled in European football that decade, George Best had said United needed a miracle. They were 2-0 down after 11 minutes. And then Roy Keane did something that football has been trying to fully explain for 25 years. He had received a yellow card earlier in the competition. He knew, from the moment he walked onto that pitch, and from the moment he received any yellow card in this match, that he would be suspended for the final. If United won through, he would not play in Barcelona. In the 24th minute, Keane leapt to meet a Beckham corner and headed in United's first goal. It was the start of the comeback. Then he received his booking. Suspended. Final gone. The minute he was booked and out of the final, he seemed to redouble his efforts to get the team there. For the remaining 66 minutes of that match, Roy Keane produced what Ferguson would later call something he had never seen before. Against the midfield of Zidane, Deschamps, Davids and Conte, he ran more, competed harder, organized more loudly, and imposed himself more completely than any player on either team. United won 3-2. Dwight Yorke equalized. Andy Cole scored the winner late. United were going to the final, and their captain was going home to watch it on television. After the match, Keane walked around the pitch and consoled the teammates who had also received bookings and would miss the final, Scholes among them. He did not celebrate. He did not speak to the cameras. He just walked quietly around the pitch where he had just produced the greatest individual performance of that entire Champions League campaign, knowing he would never play in what it led to. When Ferguson later called it the most emphatic display of selflessness I have seen on a football field, Keane was asked to respond. His answer defines him better than any goal or trophy ever could. The television cameras caught Keane's face as Ferguson's quote was read to him. He looked almost irritated. "Stuff like that almost insults me," he said. "What am I supposed to do? Give up? Not cover every blade of grass? Not do my best for my teammates? Not do my best for my club? I actually get offended when people throw quotes like that at me, as if I'm supposed to be honored by it. It's like praising the postman for delivering your letters. He's supposed to, isn't he? That's his job." Read that response slowly, because it is, in a single paragraph, the most complete portrait of Roy Keane's character that exists anywhere. He was not being falsely modest. He was not performing humility for the cameras. He was genuinely confused by the idea that doing his job to the highest possible standard, in the highest pressure moment, at a cost to himself, was something worthy of extraordinary praise. To Keane, that was not exceptional. That was the minimum. That standard applied to himself, applied ruthlessly to every player who shared a dressing room with him, is what Ferguson was really describing when he said Keane was the best he ever had. Not the talent, not the trophies. The minimum standard that Keane considered acceptable was higher than almost any other player Ferguson managed was willing to impose on themselves. And that gap between the floor of Roy Keane's expectations and the ceiling of most other players' aspirations is the tactical secret behind 13 Premier League titles. But there is one final chapter to this story, one that almost nobody outside Manchester United's inner circle knows in full. Between 1993 and 2005, Roy Keane won 7 Premier League titles for FA Cups and 1 Champions League at Manchester United. He made 479 appearances for the club and scored 51 goals, a remarkable return for a player whose primary role was defensive control and leadership. But the statistic that matters most is not in that list. It is the statistic that nobody has ever been able to put a number on. How many points over 12 years did the players around Keane produce because of him rather than despite the challenge of playing alongside him? Gary Neville has spoken about it. So has Giggs. Beckham, in his autobiography, described training sessions where Keane's presence changed the entire intensity of the session, not because he told anyone to work harder, but because the option of not working hard simply disappeared when Keane was in the room. Brian Clough had given Keane the foundation. He had once said to the young Irishman in a dressing room, "You can pass it, you can shoot, and you can run, so just do those three things." Keane took that simplicity and made it a standard. He added only one rule of his own: do all three at 100% for 90 minutes, every time. Ferguson recognized it from the first conversation in Wilmslow. He didn't sign Keane because he was the most talented player available. He signed him because in their meeting over snooker, he recognized something he had been looking for in a midfielder since he arrived at Old Trafford in 1986. Someone who hated losing more than he loved winning. That distinction sounds small. It is, in practice, the difference between building a good team and building a dynasty. The retirement tribute. Ferguson stands up. He has Ronaldo in his squad at that moment, the most physically gifted footballer he has ever worked with, a player already winning individual awards and terrifying fullbacks across Europe. He has had Cantona, who changed the culture of United when he arrived in 1992 and brought a belief that the club could win anything it chose to win. He has had Scholes, the player Zidane placed above everyone else in his generation. And he says this: Roy's obsession with winning and the demands he put on others made him the most influential player in the dressing room. He became a great captain through that, and to my mind, he is the best player I have had in all of my time here. The word he chooses is not most talented, not most gifted, not highest ceiling. He says best. And in choosing that word, Ferguson is making a very precise argument about what football actually is. It is not an individual performance competition. It is a collective endeavor, played across 11 players, across 38 league matches, and however far a cup run takes you, sustained across an entire season, and then the next one, and the next. The player who makes that collective perform at its ceiling, every week, every month, every season, is worth more than the player who performs at his own ceiling and leaves the collective to manage itself. Keane never left the collective to manage itself. For 12 years, he made it perform above its level. Ferguson had Cantona. He had Scholes. He had Ronaldo. He chose Keane. Go back to the beginning. A 14-year-old in Cork, writing letters to English clubs, being turned down for trials, signing for an amateur club in the League of Ireland for £47,000. That player, the one no English club wanted at 14, who nearly went to Blackburn Rovers because the paperwork wasn't finished on a Friday afternoon, became the answer to the question Ferguson spent his entire career trying to answer. What do you build around when you have world-class talent everywhere on the pitch? The answer, it turned out, was not more world-class talent. The answer was the one player who would hold every other player accountable to the standard that world-class talent demands. The captain who would rather miss a Champions League final than give less than everything in the semi-final. The player who found Ferguson's praise almost offensive because he could not imagine doing it any other way. 7 Premier League titles, 4 FA Cups, 1 Champions League. Keane won all of them. And in the 2005-06 season, the first full Premier League campaign after he left, United finished in 2nd place. Draw your own conclusions. Here's the question I want you to sit with. Ferguson's choice, Keane above Cantona, Scholes, and Ronaldo, is fundamentally an argument about what wins trophies. Not the most talented player. The player who makes everyone else perform above their level. Do you agree with Ferguson's verdict? And more importantly, is there a Roy Keane in any current team in world football? A player who holds the collective to a standard that talent alone never could? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to hear who you'd nominate.